Chapter 1. A bitter trade begins. Tea. Sweet, warm tea. The British cannot get enough of it. In the mornings, they sip it with breakfast. In the afternoons, they gather with friends, pouring it into delicate cups. By the 1800s, tea is not just a drink. It is a way of life. But there's a problem. Tea comes from China. The Chinese have everything the British want. Tea, silk, porcelain. But the British do not have enough silver to pay for it. The British try other goods, wool, cotton, metal. But the Chinese refuse. We have no need for these things, they say. The Chinese emperor believes his nation is already rich. China is called the Middle Kingdom because it sees itself as the center of the world. Why would they want British goods? The trade is one-sided. The British keep losing silver. They grow desperate. Then, someone has an idea. A dangerous idea. The British decide to trade opium. Opium is a drug. It is made from poppy plants and has been used for medicine. But opium can also be addictive. When people use too much of it, they cannot stop. It takes over their lives. British merchants start bringing opium into China. At first, it is a small trade. Quiet, secret, but soon it grows. Farmers in India, under British rule, plant fields of poppies. Ships carry opium across the sea, unloading it onto Chinese shores. The merchants are clever. They use silver to buy tea, silk, and porcelain. Then they sell opium to get their silver back. They make huge profits. In China, the opium spreads like fire. It starts in the cities. Wealthy men smoke it in small pipes, lying back on soft cushions. Then it reaches the countryside. Poor farmers, tired from long days in the fields, try it too. It makes them forget their troubles for a while. But soon, addiction takes hold. People can't work. They spend all their money on more opium. Families starve. Villages fall apart. In the palace, the emperor hears of the trouble. He calls his officials. "This poison is destroying my people," he cries. "We must stop it." One official, Linzexu, stands tall. "I will do whatever it takes," he says. Lin is brave. He is determined. He writes letters to the British merchants begging them to stop, but they ignore him. So, Lin takes action. He orders his men to search ships for opium. They find it hidden in barrels and sacks. In one bold move, Lin seizes thousands of crates of opium in the port of Canton. The merchants are furious. But Lin doesn't stop there. He orders the opium to be destroyed. Soldiers pour the drug into large trenches dug in the ground. Then they mix it with water and lime. The air fills with a sharp, bitter smell. The merchants watch in silence. Their profits gone. Their power challenged. Across the sea in Britain, the news spreads. Merchants tell their government, "China has no right to take our goods." The British argue that they must protect free trade. But behind their words lies something else: greed. The British Navy prepares for war. Their ships are strong, built for battle. Cannons line their decks. The sailors are trained and ready. In China, the people worry. They have heard of British ships called steamers. Fast and deadly, they can sail against the wind. The Qing dynasty has its own navy, but their ships are wooden. They cannot match British firepower. Back in the villages, life grows harder. A farmer named Li Wei sits with his wife. Their son is missing. He left to work in the city and started smoking opium. Li Wei has searched for him everywhere. "I cannot find him," Li Wei says. His voice trembles. His wife wipes her eyes. "The opium has taken him," she whispers. Li Wei clenches his fists. "This must stop," he shouts. But what can one man do against such a powerful trade? The air in Canton is tense. Merchants whisper in dark alleys. Soldiers march through the streets. Lin Zexu writes a final letter to Queen Victoria in Britain. He explains the damage opium has caused. "Do you not care for justice?" he asks. "If someone brought poison to your country, would you allow it? Would you let your people suffer?" But the Queen does not reply. The British fleet sets sail. Cannons are polished. Flags are raised. The merchants watch from the harbor, their hearts pounding. War is coming. Lin Zexu walks through the port. The sun is setting, painting the sky red and gold. He sees fishermen hauling nets. He hears the cries of market sellers. "This is my home," he thinks. "I must protect it." But deep down, Lin knows the battles ahead will be hard. The British are powerful. Their weapons are advanced. Still, Lin does not give up. He vows to fight for his people, for his emperor, for his land. The waves crash against the shore. The first British ship appears on the horizon. Its sails are wide. Its cannons glint in the sunlight. The Opium War has begun. Chapter 2. The Emperor Takes a Stand. Lin Zexu was not an ordinary official. He was smart, he was strong, he cared deeply for his people. When the emperor chose him to deal with the opium crisis, Lin knew it was a great responsibility. He had seen the damage opium caused. Families were broken. Workers could no longer do their jobs. Streets were filled with people begging for more of the drug. Lin felt anger rise in his chest. He could not let this continue. In 1839, Lin sat at his desk in Canton. He dipped his brush into the ink and began to write. His letter was not to an ordinary person. It was for Queen Victoria, the ruler of Britain. He wrote boldly, "Your merchants sell poison to my people. You know how dangerous opium is. Would you allow it in your own country? Would you let your people suffer as mine do? I beg you, stop this trade. Show justice. Show kindness." Lin signed his name with a firm hand. He rolled up the letter and sealed it. The words were powerful, but he did not know if the Queen would ever read them. Lin could not wait for a reply. He had to act. Canton was the center of the opium trade. Every day, ships from British merchants arrived. They carried crates of opium hidden among other goods. The crates were unloaded onto small boats and smuggled into the city. Lin sent soldiers to search the ships. They found opium hidden in barrels marked as tea. They found it in boxes labeled as silk. The merchants tried to bribe the soldiers. They offered gold and silver, but Lin's men refused. Finally, Lin gave an order. Take all the opium to the edge of the city. The people of Canton gathered to watch. Soldiers carried crate after crate of opium to a large trench dug near the sea. The crates were piled high. The sun beat down, and the smell of the drug filled the air. Lin climbed onto a platform. He looked at the crowd. His voice was loud and firm. This poison has harmed our families. It has taken our sons. It has taken our fathers. Today, we destroy it. We will show the world that China will not be weakened. The crowd cheered, but there was also fear. The British merchants watched from a distance, their faces dark with anger. The soldiers opened the crates. Brown blocks of opium tumbled out. The soldiers poured water and lime over them. Smoke rose into the air. The drug melted into a thick, foul liquid that seeped into the ground. A British merchant named Charles looked on. His fists were clenched. "They are destroying our goods," he muttered. "This is war." The merchants hurried to send messages back to Britain. They demanded action. Days later, Lin received reports. The British merchants had stopped trade in Canton. Ships were gathering along the coast. Rumors spread that British warships were coming. Lin did not flinch. He wrote to the emperor in Beijing, explaining his actions. "We must be strong," he wrote. "The British cannot bully us. If they attack, we will defend our land." The emperor was impressed. Lin Zexu was brave, but others in the court worried. They knew the British had powerful ships and modern weapons. Meanwhile, life in Canton was tense. Fishermen stayed close to shore, afraid of the foreign ships. Merchants whispered in the markets. Families prepared to leave the city, fearing an attack. A young boy named Chen watched as his father packed their belongings. "Why are we leaving?" Chen asked. His father sighed. "The British are angry. They might bring their warships here. It's not safe." Chen looked back at their small home. Tears filled his eyes. He didn't want to leave, but he could see the worry in his father's face. The days passed, but no warships arrived. Lin Zexu used the time to prepare. He trained soldiers. He strengthened defenses along the coast. He wrote more letters to local officials, urging them to stay strong. But deep down, Lin knew this was just the beginning. The British wanted revenge. They cared more about their profits than the pain opium caused. Far away, in Britain, the merchants met with government leaders. They described Lin Zexu as a villain. "He has no right to destroy our goods," they argued. The British government agreed. But they also saw an opportunity. If they won a war, they could demand more trade. They could take Chinese land. Warships were ordered to prepare. Cannons were loaded. Soldiers boarded the ships, ready to sail to China. Back in Canton, Lin Zexu walked through the city. He saw a fisherman mending his nets. He saw children playing in the narrow streets. He thought about the lives he was protecting. "This is my duty," he whispered to himself. "I will not let my people suffer any longer." But as he looked out at the sea, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. British warships were coming, and Lin knew the fight ahead would not be easy. Chapter 3. War Erupts. The year was 1839. Along China's southern coast, the air was tense. The people of Canton had heard the rumors. The British Navy was on its way. The warships were fast and deadly. Their cannons could destroy entire cities. Lin Zexu stood on the shore, his hands behind his back. He gazed out at the horizon. He had prepared as much as he could. Soldiers were ready. Coastal defenses were strengthened. But in his heart, he knew this would be a difficult fight. The British fleet arrived like a storm. Their ships, made of steel, cut through the waves. They flew the Union Jack, a symbol of British power. Smoke rose from their chimneys as steam engines drove them forward. On the other side, the Qing Navy waited. Their ships, called junks, were smaller. Made of wood, they were slower and less stable. The sailors were brave, but they lacked the advanced weapons of the British. The first battle began near Canton. The British opened fire. Cannons roared, sending iron balls crashing into the Chinese ships. Smoke filled the air. Flames licked at the wooden junks. Sailors jumped into the water, trying to escape. From the shore, villagers watched in horror. A young boy named Chen clung to his mother's hand. He had never seen anything like it. "Will they destroy our city?" he whispered. His mother didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the burning ships. The British didn't stop at sea. They moved inland. Soldiers marched through villages, taking food and supplies. They set fire to homes. The Qing soldiers fought bravely, but were outmatched. Their weapons, bows, spears, and simple muskets, were no match for British rifles. In one village, a farmer named Li Wei hid with his family. They crouched in a small cellar, listening to the sounds above. Boots stomped through the house. Pots crashed to the floor. Li Wei's heart pounded. He held his daughter close. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Outside, the British soldiers laughed as they ate the family's rice. Then they moved on, leaving the village in ruins. News of the British victories spread quickly. In Beijing, the emperor was furious. He called his advisors to the palace. "How can this happen?" he demanded. "We are the Middle Kingdom, the most powerful empire on earth." The advisors bowed their heads. They had no answers. The British weapons were simply too advanced. Some advisors suggested making peace. "Perhaps we can negotiate," they said. "If we give them what they want, they may leave us alone." But others argued for more resistance. "We cannot surrender," they said. "We must defend our honor." The emperor's decision was final. "Fight!" he commanded. "We will not let these barbarians defeat us." The war continued. British ships sailed along the coast, attacking port cities. In each battle, the Qing forces tried to stand their ground, but the British were too strong. In the city of Amoy, a merchant named Zhang watched helplessly as British soldiers entered his shop. They took everything: silk, porcelain, even the tea leaves he had stored for winter. "You can't take this," Zhang protested. A soldier shoved him aside. "You're lucky we don't burn the place down," he growled. Zhang slumped to the ground. He thought of his family. How would they survive now? The British were not just fighting for revenge. They had a plan. They wanted more than tea, silk, and silver. They wanted control. At the heart of their strategy was the city of Shanghai. It was a major port, vital for trade. If they could capture Shanghai, they could control the region. The Qing forces tried to defend the city. Soldiers lined the riverbanks, firing arrows and muskets, but the British cannons blasted through their defenses. The city fell within days. For the people of Shanghai, it was a nightmare. Homes were destroyed. Markets were looted. Families were torn apart. Back in Canton, Lin Zexu received the reports. Each message was worse than the last. Cities were falling. Soldiers were retreating. Lin felt a deep sorrow. He had done everything he could to stop the British. But now he began to wonder if it was enough. One night, he sat alone in his office. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows on the walls. He picked up his brush and began to write. His letter was for the emperor. "Your Majesty," he wrote, "the enemy is strong. Our defenses are weak. I beg you to consider peace, for the sake of our people." Meanwhile, the British celebrated their victories. In London, the news of the war spread quickly. Newspapers called it a triumph. Merchants looked forward to new trade opportunities. But not everyone was pleased. Some British citizens questioned the morality of the war. A young sailor named Thomas, who had fought in the battles, wrote a letter to his mother. "Dear Mother," he wrote, "the things I have seen are terrible. Villages burned, families torn apart. I wonder if we are the villains in this story." The war dragged on for months. The Qing forces were losing hope. Some soldiers deserted, others fought to the bitter end. One soldier named Wang refused to give up. He had grown up in a small village surrounded by rice fields. When the British came, they burned his home and killed his father. "I fight for my family," Wang said. "I fight for my land." But even Wang knew the odds were against them. Finally, the British reached the gates of Nanking. The city was one of China's greatest treasures. If it fell, the Qing dynasty would have no choice but to surrender. Lin Zexu had been removed from his position by this time. The emperor blamed him for the failures in the war. But Lin's spirit remained strong. "This is not the end," he told his family. "China will rise again." As the sun set over the Yangtze River, the British prepared for their final assault. Soldiers polished their rifles. Cannons were aimed at the city walls. The people of Nanking waited, their hearts heavy with fear. The war was about to reach its bloody conclusion. Chapter 4. A Treaty Signed in Blood. The city of Nanking lay in silence. The streets were empty. The people hid behind closed doors, afraid of what might happen next. The Qing forces had lost battle after battle. Now, the British Navy sat on the Yangtze River, their cannons aimed at the city walls. The Qing government had no choice. They sent a delegation to meet the British. The emperor's representatives carried no weapons, only papers. The British, confident in their victory, waited calmly. The meeting would change China forever. The British demanded harsh terms. They knew they had the upper hand. The Qing officials, tired and humiliated, listened in silence. "First," said a British officer, "you must pay for all the opium Lin Zexu destroyed. That will be 6 million silver dollars. The officials exchanged nervous glances. 6 million was a fortune. But the British were not finished. "Second," the officer continued, "you will give us the island of Hong Kong." Hong Kong was small but important. It had a deep harbor, perfect for ships. The Qing officials protested. "This land belongs to China," one of them said, but the British ignored him. "And third," the officer said, his voice growing colder, "you will open 5 more ports for trade. British merchants must be free to sell their goods in your cities." This demand struck a nerve. Opening more ports meant more opium. The officials thought of the families already ruined by the drug, but they had no power to refuse. The Qing officials returned to the emperor with the British demands. The emperor read the terms slowly, his hands shaking. He could not believe what he saw. "We cannot agree to this," he shouted. His voice echoed through the palace halls. An advisor stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we have no choice," he said. "If we refuse, they will attack Nanking. Thousands will die." The emperor fell silent. He looked out the window toward the mountains in the distance. "Have we truly fallen so far?" he whispered. In August 1842, the Treaty of Nanking was signed. The Qing government surrendered. The treaty was written in both English and Chinese. But for the people of China, it felt like a foreign language. It spoke of defeat, shame, and loss. The first term was the payment of the fine. 6 million silver dollars for the opium, 3 million for debts from the war, another 3 million as a gift to Britain. In total, China owed 12 million silver dollars. The amount was staggering. Next was Hong Kong. The island was officially handed over to Britain. Chinese people living there became subjects of the British Crown. For the first time in history, a part of China was no longer Chinese. Finally, the ports were named Canton, Amoy, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai. British merchants could trade freely there. They could bring in as much opium as they wanted. When the news of the treaty spread, the Chinese people were stunned. In Canton, a farmer named Li Wei sat with his wife, reading the announcement. His wife shook her head. "They took Hong Kong?" she said. "How can the emperor allow this?" Li Wei frowned. "What could he do?" he replied. "Their weapons are too strong." But his words did not comfort her. She thought of their son, lost to opium addiction. "More ports will mean more opium," she said. "More suffering." Li Wei nodded. He had no answer. In Shanghai, a merchant named Zhang prepared for the changes. The city would soon be flooded with foreign traders. British ships would fill the harbor. British goods would fill the markets. "We must adapt," Zhang told his son. "If we don't, we will be left behind." But Zhang's son, a young man with fiery eyes, shook his head. "We should fight," he said. "Why let the British take what is ours?" Zhang sighed. "I understand your anger," he said, "but we have already lost. Now we must survive." On the British side, there was celebration. Merchants in London cheered the news of the treaty. They saw it as a victory for free trade. A merchant named Charles, who had witnessed the destruction of opium in Canton, raised a glass at a party. "To progress," he said. "Now we can bring civilization to the East." But not everyone agreed. A British sailor named Thomas, who had fought in the war, sat quietly in the corner. He remembered the villages they had burned, the families they had left homeless. "Civilization," he muttered to himself. "It feels more like robbery." The Treaty of Nanking was not just a loss for China. It was a turning point. The Qing dynasty, once strong and proud, now seemed weak. Other nations watched closely. In France, in the United States, in Russia, leaders began to see opportunities. If Britain could force China to open its doors, why couldn't they? And within China, the people began to question their rulers. How could the emperor protect them if he could not protect their land? In a small village near Nanking, an elderly scholar named Wang wrote in his journal. His brush moved slowly, his thoughts heavy. "We have entered a new era," he wrote, "an era of shame, but also an era of awakening. The British have taken much from us, but they cannot take our spirit." Wang closed the journal and set down his brush. He looked out at the fields where young men worked in silence. Perhaps, he thought, one day we will rise again. The treaty was signed. The war was over. But for the Chinese people, the struggle was just beginning. In the years that followed, the effects of the Treaty of Nanking would spread like ripples in a pond. Hong Kong would grow into a major British colony. The ports would become hubs for foreign trade and foreign influence. And the Qing dynasty would face more challenges, both from within and from beyond its borders. The Treaty of Nanking was not just a document. It was a wound, a reminder of what had been lost, and what still needed to be reclaimed. Before we begin Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on Woo English. Remember, this content is specially made for Woo English listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of Woo English's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6. The Fall of the Summer Palace. In the year 1860, the city of Beijing held its breath. The streets were quiet, but the tension was heavy. The British and French armies were approaching. People whispered about the foreign troops. They were armed with powerful weapons. They showed no mercy. The emperor had fled the city. He left behind his advisors, his soldiers, and his people. The Qing dynasty seemed weaker than ever. At the heart of Beijing stood the Summer Palace, known as Yuan. It was not just a building, it was a masterpiece. The Summer Palace was vast and beautiful. Its gardens stretched for miles, filled with flowers, lakes, and bridges. The halls were decorated with fine art and golden statues. Inside, treasures were kept. Paintings, jewels, and books that told the story of China's history. People called it the Garden of Gardens. It was a place of peace and beauty. But soon, it would become a symbol of loss. The British and French troops reached the gates of Beijing. They demanded that the Qing government surrender. But the talks broke down. The armies decided to send a message. They wanted to show their power. They chose the Summer Palace as their target. The soldiers marched through the gates. Their boots echoed on the stone paths. The air was filled with the sound of orders being shouted. Inside the palace, a servant named May hid behind a large vase. She could hear the foreign soldiers coming closer. "Please," she whispered, clutching her hands together. "Don't destroy this place." But the soldiers were not there to admire the beauty. They were there to take everything of value. The looting began. Soldiers smashed open chests and cabinets. They grabbed gold and silver. They tore paintings from the walls. Ancient books were thrown to the ground. A French officer held up a jade statue. "Magnificent," he said, turning it in his hands. "This will look fine in Paris." Nearby, a British soldier found a silk robe embroidered with dragons. He laughed as he draped it over his shoulders. May peeked out from her hiding spot. Her eyes filled with tears. She had worked in the palace for years. She had cared for its treasures. Now they were being stolen and destroyed. Outside, the gardens were in chaos. Soldiers cut down trees for firewood. Statues were smashed to pieces. The lakes, once calm and clear, were muddy from the trampling boots. A Chinese scholar named Li watched from a distance. He had spent years studying in the palace library. Now, those books were gone. His heart ached. "Why do they do this?" he asked aloud. "What have we done to deserve this?" But no one answered. The soldiers worked quickly. They loaded carts with treasures. Boxes of gold and jade were sent back to the ships. The officers smiled, pleased with their loot. But it was not enough. The commanders decided to destroy what they could not take. "Burn it," one officer said simply. The fires began in the afternoon. Smoke rose into the sky, black and thick. The flames spread quickly, fueled by the wood of the palace halls. May ran from her hiding spot. She could feel the heat on her face. "Stop!" she cried. "Please stop!" But no one listened. The soldiers ignored her. Some even laughed. The fire roared like a dragon. The beautiful halls collapsed into ashes. The golden statues melted in the heat. From a hill outside the city, Li watched the smoke rise. His hands trembled. His eyes burned with tears. The summer palace was more than a building. It was a piece of China's soul. "They are destroying us," he said softly. "They are tearing apart who we are." Others around him nodded, but no one knew what to do. The fire burned for 2 days. By the time it was over, the summer palace was gone. Only rubble remained. The British and French armies left the city soon after. They had sent their message. For the Chinese people, the destruction of the summer palace was more than a military loss. It was a wound. A deep wound that would take years to heal. News of the destruction spread across China. In small villages, people wept when they heard the stories. A farmer named Zhang sat with his wife. "They took everything," he said. "Even the books, even our history." His wife nodded. "How can we fight against such power?" she asked. Zhang didn't answer. He didn't know. In Europe, the looted treasures were displayed in museums. Crowds marveled at the beauty of the Chinese artifacts, but few thought about the destruction it took to obtain them. A British soldier named Thomas returned home and spoke to his family about what he had seen. "The palace was the most beautiful place I've ever been," he said. "But now, it's gone. I don't know if we did the right thing." His mother looked at him carefully. "War is never right," she said. In Beijing, the people tried to move on, but the ruins of the summer palace were a constant reminder. Children played near the rubble, not understanding what had been lost. Li, the scholar, returned to the site. He walked among the ashes, searching for anything that had survived. He found a broken piece of pottery and held it tightly. "This is all that's left," he said, "but we will rebuild. One day, we will be strong again." The destruction of the summer palace left a scar on China. It was a symbol of humiliation, a reminder of foreign power. But it also sparked a fire in the hearts of the people. For years to come, the memory of the palace would inspire those who dreamed of a stronger, united China. And though the buildings were gone, the spirit of Yuan Mingyuan lived on. Chapter 7. Voices of the People. The war was not just fought in battles. It was fought in homes, in villages, and in the hearts of people. The soldiers carried weapons, but the people carried the burden. Their stories were often forgotten, but they were the soul of the conflict. Li Wei was a farmer in a small village near Canton. His land had been in his family for generations. He grew rice and vegetables, enough to feed his family and sell at the market. Life was simple, but it was good. Then, the war came. Li Wei's village was in the path of the British troops. One day, soldiers marched in. Their boots kicked up dust as they passed. The village elders went out to speak with them. "Please," they said, "we are simple farmers. We mean no harm." But the soldiers needed supplies. They took rice, tools, and even the family's ox. Li Wei watched as his fields grew empty. His children cried from hunger. "Why is this happening to us?" his wife asked. Li Wei had no answer. Far away, in London, a sailor named Thomas prepared for war. He was young, barely 20, and eager to see the world. When he joined the Navy, he dreamed of adventure. But war was not what he had imagined. Thomas stood on the deck of a British ship as it sailed toward China. The sea was rough, and the air was cold. He wrote a letter to his mother. "Dear Mother," he began, "I do not know why we are fighting this war. They say it is for trade, but I have seen the faces of the people we harm. It does not feel right." He folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. He would send it when they reached port, if he could find the courage. Back in China, May was a servant in a wealthy household in Canton. She had worked there since she was a child, caring for the family's children and cleaning the large house. When the war began, the family fled to the countryside. May stayed behind. She had nowhere else to go. One evening, British soldiers entered the house. They broke furniture, smashed dishes, and searched for valuables. May hid under a table, her heart pounding. "Take what you can," one soldier shouted. May clenched her fists. She wanted to stop them. But what could she do? She was just one person against many. When the soldiers left, the house was in ruins. May sat on the floor, surrounded by broken pieces of her life. Zhang was a merchant in Shanghai. He had built his business from nothing, trading silk and tea. His shop was small, but successful. He was proud of what he had achieved. Then, Shanghai became a battleground. The British took control of the city, and foreign merchants flooded the markets. Zhang struggled to compete. They had better goods and lower prices. Customers stopped coming to his shop. One evening, Zhang sat with his son. "I don't know how we will survive," he said quietly. His son, a teenager with bright eyes, looked at him with determination. "We will find a way," he said. "This is our home. We cannot give up." Zhang smiled weakly. His son's words gave him hope, but he knew the road ahead would be hard. Thomas, the sailor, finally arrived in China. The ship anchored near Canton, and the crew was ordered to prepare for battle. Thomas followed the others, carrying supplies and loading cannons. But his heart was heavy. During a break, he spoke with an older sailor named George. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Thomas asked. George shrugged. "Right or wrong doesn't matter," he said. "We follow orders. That's what being a soldier is." Thomas nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that George was wrong. In a village near Beijing, an elderly scholar named Wang lived with his grandson. Wang had spent his life studying poetry and history. He often told stories of China's greatness to his grandson, but now he had no words. The British and French armies had marched through the area, leaving destruction in their wake. Wang's small library was gone, burned with the rest of the village. His grandson, a boy of 10, sat beside him. "Grandfather," the boy said, "why do they hate us?" Wang sighed. "They do not hate us," he said. "They want power, and they will destroy anything to get it." The boy frowned. "But why don't we fight back?" Wang looked at the ruins of his home. "We are fighting," he said softly, "in our own way." May decided to leave Canton. There was nothing left for her there. She joined a group of refugees heading north. The journey was hard. They walked for days, through forests and over mountains. May carried a small bag with her few belongings. One night, as they camped by a river, May looked at the stars. She thought of the family she had served. She wondered if they were safe. She also thought of the soldiers who had destroyed her home. "They took everything from me," she whispered, "but they will not take my spirit." Li Wei, the farmer, tried to rebuild. He planted new crops, hoping the war would not return to his village. One day, he saw his son playing in the dirt. The boy held a small wooden horse, his only toy. Li Wei knelt beside him. "One day, this will all be yours," he said, motioning to the fields. His son looked up at him. "Even after the soldiers came?" he asked. Li Wei nodded. "Even after everything. We are still here, and that means we are strong." The voices of the people were quiet, but they carried great strength. A merchant, a farmer, a scholar, a sailor, a war touched them all. Their lives were changed forever, but even in the darkest times, they found hope. They taught their children. They rebuilt their homes. They dreamed of a future where such pain would never return. And though they did not hold weapons, they fought in their own way. Chapter 8. A Shattered Nation. The war had ended, but peace did not follow. China, once proud and powerful, was now at the mercy of foreign powers. The Treaty of Nanking had been signed in 1842, but it was only the beginning. Over the next 2 decades, more treaties were forced on the Qing government. These agreements were called the Unequal Treaties. They brought shame to the nation. In cities like Shanghai, British, French, and American merchants grew rich. They controlled the ports and the trade. Chinese merchants struggled to compete. The streets filled with foreign shops, foreign goods, and foreign rules. Zhang, a silk merchant in Shanghai, looked at his empty store. He had once been successful, selling fine silk to wealthy customers. But now, foreigners sold their goods for less. His customers had disappeared. "How can I survive?" he asked his wife one night. His wife shook her head. "We cannot win against them," she said. "The rules are in their favor." Zhang clenched his fists. "This is our land," he said, "but we have no control." The unequal treaties forced China to give up more than trade. Foreigners could now live in special areas called concessions. These were parts of Chinese cities where foreign laws ruled. Chinese officials had no power there. In one such area in Canton, a young boy named Chen watched as foreign soldiers marched through the streets. Their uniforms were clean, and their weapons gleamed in the sun. Chen's father pulled him back. "Don't stare," he said sharply. "Why not?" Chen asked. His father's face was hard. "Because they think they are better than us," he said, "and there's nothing we can do about it." Chen looked down. He didn't understand why his father was so angry, but he could feel the tension in the air. The treaties also allowed more opium to enter the country. The drug continued to destroy families and villages. In a small town near the Yangtze River, Li Wei, the farmer, sat on the edge of his field. He watched as a group of young men smoked opium under a tree. Their faces were pale, their eyes empty. Li Wei sighed. His own son had once worked beside him in the fields, but now he spent his days chasing the drug. "Opium has taken my son," Li Wei said to his wife, "and it has taken the future of our village." In Beijing, the emperor sat in his grand palace, but his power was slipping away. Each new treaty brought more demands. Each defeat weakened the Qing dynasty. Advisors filled the palace halls, arguing about what to do. Some wanted to fight back, to drive the foreigners out. Others said it was hopeless. One advisor, an old man with a long beard, bowed before the emperor. "Your Majesty," he said, "we must reform. We must learn from the foreigners if we wish to survive." But the emperor frowned. "Why should we learn from those who humiliate us?" he asked. The old advisor bowed lower. "Because if we don't, Your Majesty, we will lose everything." The people of China began to lose faith in their rulers. The Qing government seemed unable to protect the nation. Rebellions broke out in the countryside. Farmers, angry at high taxes and foreign control, took up arms. In one village, a group of men gathered late at night. They spoke in hushed voices, afraid of being overheard. "The emperor has failed us," one man said. "It's time we take matters into our own hands." "But what can we do?" another man asked. "The foreigners have guns. The Qing soldiers are too strong." The first man looked around the room. His voice grew firm. "We fight," he said, "for our land, for our families, for China." In the foreign concessions, life was very different. British and French families lived in large houses with gardens. Their children played in the streets, watched by Chinese servants. May, who had fled Canton during the war, found work as a maid in a British household. She polished floors and cooked meals. She heard the foreign children laughing as they played. One day, as she swept the floor, her employer's son asked her a question. "Why don't you live in a house like ours?" the boy asked. May looked at him. His blue eyes were wide with curiosity. She didn't know how to answer. "This is just the way it is," she said quietly. But in her heart, she thought, it shouldn't be. The tension in the cities grew each day. Chinese workers were treated as second-class citizens in their own land. Soldiers patrolled the streets, keeping order, but the anger of the people could not be silenced. In Shanghai, Zhang's son joined a group of young men who called for change. They met in secret, planning protests and spreading messages of resistance. One evening, Zhang found his son writing a letter. "What are you doing?" Zhang asked. "Writing to my friends," his son replied. Zhang frowned. "Be careful," he said. "The foreigners will not hesitate to punish those who challenge them." His son looked up. "If we do nothing, Father, nothing will change." The unequal treaties did more than take land and money. They took dignity. For the people of China, each treaty was a reminder of their weakness. But in the midst of the pain, seeds of hope began to grow. Some believed that China could rise again. In a small school in Beijing, a teacher named Wang stood before his students. He spoke of China's history, its culture, and its achievements. "Do not forget who we are," he said. "The foreigners may have power now, but they cannot take our spirit. One day we will rebuild." The students listened closely. Among them was a boy who would later become a leader in the fight for a new China. The unequal treaties left China shattered. The Qing government was weak. Foreign powers controlled the ports, but the people of China were not defeated. They carried their anger and their hope. They dreamed of a stronger nation, and though the road was long and difficult, they believed in a better future. Chapter 9. Shadows of the Opium Trade. Opium had taken root in China like a poisonous weed. It grew everywhere, in the homes of the rich, in the streets of the poor, in the fields where farmers worked. The drug did not care who you were. It stole the minds of scholars, the strength of workers, and the happiness of families. Li Wei was one such man. Once a proud farmer, he had lost everything to opium. His son had introduced him to the drug, promising it would ease his pain after a long day in the fields. At first it did. The opium made Li feel light, as if his troubles were far away. But soon he could not stop. He sold his tools to buy more, then his ox, then his land. Now, Li sat outside a crumbling house, his body thin and weak. His wife stood nearby, watching him with tears in her eyes. "What have you done to us?" she whispered. Li had no answer. In the city of Shanghai, the problem was even worse. The opium dens were always full. Rich merchants smoked in private rooms, lying on silk cushions. Poor laborers crowded into dark corners, sharing a single pipe. May, who worked as a maid in a foreign household, passed an opium den every day on her way to the market. She held her breath as she walked by. The smell of the drug was thick and bitter. One day, she saw a boy sitting outside the den. His clothes were torn, and his face was pale. May knelt beside him. "Where is your family?" she asked. The boy looked at her with empty eyes. "Inside," he said softly. May's heart broke. She wanted to help him, but she didn't know how. The Qing government tried to stop the spread of opium. They issued new laws, banning its use in trade. Officials raided opium dens, arresting dealers and destroying supplies. But it was not enough. The foreign merchants still brought opium into the ports. They sold it openly, protected by the unequal treaties. Zhang, the silk merchant in Shanghai, watched helplessly as the trade grew. "They care only about their profits," he told his son one evening. "They do not see the damage they cause." His son, now a young man, clenched his fists. "Then we must make them see," he said. Resistance began to grow. In small villages and crowded cities, people started to speak out against the opium trade. Reformers called for change. Wang, a teacher in Beijing, spoke to his students about the dangers of opium. "It weakens our bodies," he said. "It clouds our minds. If we are to build a strong China, we must rid ourselves of this poison." The students listened closely. Among them was a boy who dreamed of becoming a leader. he would one day help shape China's future. In the countryside, farmers formed secret groups to fight the opium trade. They destroyed shipments, burned opium fields, and chased away dealers. Li Wei's wife joined one such group. She had lost too much to stay silent. One night, she returned home after a meeting. Li was asleep on the floor, an empty pipe beside him. She looked at him and felt a mix of anger and sadness. "We will stop this," she whispered, "even if it's too late for you." The reformers faced many challenges. The foreign merchants were powerful. They had money, weapons, and the protection of their governments. But the resistance continued to grow. May joined a group of women who cared for the victims of opium. They worked in the poorest parts of the city, feeding hungry children and helping addicts recover. One day, May visited a small house where a mother and her 2 children lived. The mother was weak from years of smoking opium. May knelt beside her and took her hand. "You can get better," May said. "We will help you." The mother looked at her with tired eyes. "Why do you care?" she asked. "Because no one else will," May replied. The Qing government also began to change. Some officials realized that China needed to reform if it was to survive. They called for new schools, modern weapons, and stronger laws. One official, inspired by the resistance, wrote a letter to the emperor. "Your Majesty," he wrote, "our nation is in danger. Opium is destroying our people. Foreign powers control our ports, but the spirit of China is not broken. With your leadership, we can rise again." The emperor read the letter in silence. He did not reply. In the foreign concessions, the merchants continued their trade. They grew rich while the people of China suffered. But even among the foreigners, there were those who questioned the opium trade. Thomas, the British sailor, had seen the effects of opium during his time in China. One evening, he sat with an older sailor, George, and shared his thoughts. "Have you ever seen what opium does to a person?" Thomas asked. George nodded. "I have," he said. "It's not right." "Then why do we keep selling it?" Thomas asked. George sighed. "Because it makes money," he said. "And for some, money is all that matters." The shadows of the opium trade hung over China. Families were broken, villages were ruined. But the resistance brought hope. Li Wei's wife led her group to destroy an opium shipment in the nearby town. They worked quickly, smashing crates and burning the drug. As the flames rose, she felt a sense of relief. For the first time in years, she believed that change was possible. In the city, May and her group helped more families recover. She saw children laugh again, mothers regain their strength, and addicts find new purpose. "We cannot save everyone," May said, "but we can save some." Her words inspired those around her. The reformers and revolutionaries dreamed of a new China, a China free from opium, a China free from foreign control. They knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they believed in their cause. And in the shadows of the opium trade, their voices grew louder. Chapter 10. The World Watches. The Opium Wars were not just China's story. Across the seas, in countries like Japan, the United States, and Britain, leaders and merchants watched carefully. They saw China's struggles. They saw the Qing government's weakness. For them, the wars were more than battles over trade. They were opportunities. In Japan, Emperor Komei read reports about the wars. He listened as his advisors explained what was happening in China. The Qing dynasty is losing control, one advisor said. The foreigners are taking their ports and land. The emperor frowned. If they can do this to China, he said, they may try the same with us. Japan was different from China. It had been closed to foreign trade for over 200 years, but the Opium Wars made Japanese leaders nervous. They began to rethink their policies. One samurai, named Hiroshi, stood in a council meeting. His voice was firm. If we stay closed, we will become weak like the Qing, he said. We must learn from the West. Others agreed. Japan began to open its doors, but on its own terms. Unlike China, Japan wanted to modernize before the foreigners could force them to. In the United States, merchants saw great potential in China. They wanted to trade silk, tea, and porcelain. The Opium Wars opened new doors. A young American trader named Samuel dreamed of going to China. He read stories of the grand ports, the bustling markets, and the treasures to be found there. One day, he told his father, "I will sail to Shanghai. I will build my fortune there." His father nodded. "But be careful, son," he said. "China is not what it once was. It is a land of great riches, but also great troubles." Samuel's excitement did not fade. To him, China was a land of endless opportunity. In Britain, the victories in the Opium Wars were celebrated. Merchants grew richer. Politicians praised the Navy's strength. But not everyone was proud. Thomas, the sailor who had fought in the wars, returned home to London. He walked the crowded streets, hearing people cheer for Britain's success. But inside, he felt hollow. One evening he sat with his sister Mary. She asked him about the war. "What was it like?" she said. "Did you see the Summer Palace?" Thomas hesitated. "Yes," he said finally. "It was the most beautiful place I have ever seen. And now it's gone." Mary frowned. "Why did we destroy it?" "For power," Thomas replied. "For trade. But I wonder if we've lost something more important." Back in China, the Qing government struggled to hold the country together. The unequal treaties had opened more ports to foreigners. British, French, American, and Russian merchants now controlled much of China's trade. The changes were clear in cities like Shanghai. The skyline was filled with foreign buildings. The streets bustled with people from all over the world. Zhang, the silk merchant, watched these changes with a heavy heart. His shop was struggling. Foreign goods were cheaper and more popular. One day, his son said, "Father, perhaps we should leave the city, start fresh somewhere else." Zhang shook his head. "This is our home," he said, "but it no longer feels like it." The effects of the Opium Wars reached far beyond China. Global trade began to shift. In India, farmers were forced to grow more poppies for opium. They worked long hours under the hot sun, planting and harvesting. The British East India Company made enormous profits from the trade. One farmer, named Ravi, spoke to his wife one evening. "This is not what I want for our children," he said. His wife nodded. "But what can we do?" Ravi sighed. "Nothing," he said. "As long as the British control the land, we have no choice." In France, leaders watched Britain's success in China with envy. They began to plan their own expansions in Asia. In Paris, a young diplomat named Henri spoke at a meeting. "Britain is gaining great wealth and influence in China," he said. "If we do not act, we will fall behind." France soon joined the fight, forcing its own demands on the Qing government. The world saw China as a symbol of opportunity, but also of caution. One Russian merchant wrote in his journal, "China is like a giant brought to its knees. If we are not careful, the same could happen to us." Even in Europe, leaders debated what the Opium Wars meant for their own countries. Meanwhile, in small villages across China, the people tried to carry on with their lives, but the presence of foreign merchants and soldiers was a constant reminder of their country's struggles. In a village near Canton, Li Wei's wife spoke with her neighbors. They worried about the future. "Our children will grow up under foreign rules," one woman said. Li Wei's wife nodded. "But they will also grow stronger," she said. "The world is watching, and one day we will rise again." The Opium Wars changed more than China. They changed the balance of power in the world. For centuries, China had been a great empire, respected and feared. But now it was seen as weak. Foreign powers moved in, taking land, wealth, and control. But not all hope was lost. In Beijing, a scholar named Wang spoke to his students. "Do not think that we are defeated," he said. "The world may see us as weak, but we are still here, and we will learn. We will adapt. One day, the world will see a different China." His words inspired his students. Among them were future leaders, dreamers, and revolutionaries. The Opium Wars were over, but their effects were just beginning. Countries like Japan and the United States learned from China's mistakes. They saw the dangers of foreign control. They prepared themselves for the challenges of the future. And for China, the wars were a lesson. They showed the cost of weakness and the need for change. In the years to come, China would face more struggles. But the people carried the memory of the Opium Wars with them. It was a painful memory, but also a reminder of what they could overcome. The world had watched as China fell. But the story was not over. China's journey had only just begun. Chapter 11. Lessons from the Past. The Opium Wars leave scars, but they also teach important lessons. They show the dangers of greed, addiction, and inequality. They remind people of the need for fairness and understanding between nations. Please write a graded reader in a clear and simple style, suitable for B1 learners. Use an engaging and relatable narrative tone with short sentences and emotional moments to make the story compelling. Add drama to the text by using ellipses and exclamation marks sparingly but effectively to create suspense and excitement. Use full stops to slow down the reading pace and allow learners to follow the story easily. The chapter audiobook narrature should be 1,000 words long, without repetition. Each chapter should arouse curiosity, inspire listeners, and immerse them in the subject's journey. Keep the content easy to follow, but rich in detail and emotion. Thank you. ChatGPT AD it. Chapter 11. Lessons from the Past. The Opium Wars left deep scars on China. Cities were destroyed. Families were broken. The Qing government was weakened, and the nation suffered humiliation. But these painful events also brought lessons. Lessons about greed, addiction, and the need for fairness. For those who lived through the wars, these lessons became stories they passed to their children. Stories of strength, hope, and the will to rebuild. In a small village near Canton, Li Wei's wife sat with her grandchildren. The children gathered around her, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Grandmother," one of them asked, "why did the foreigners come to China?" She sighed deeply. Her hands were worn from years of hard work, but her spirit was strong. "They came because of greed," she said. "They wanted our tea, our silk, and our land. And when they couldn't get what they wanted, they brought opium to weaken us." The children looked confused. "But why did we let them?" Li Wei's wife smiled sadly. "We didn't let them," she said. "We fought back, but we were not ready for the strength of their weapons. We were not united." Her voice grew firmer. "That is why we must learn from the past. We must stay strong, and we must never let this happen again." One lesson from the Opium Wars was about addiction. In the bustling streets of Shanghai, May continued her work helping victims of opium. She saw how the drug destroyed lives. It robbed people of their health, their families, and their futures. One day, she visited a small home where a young man lay sick in bed. His mother stood beside him, tears in her eyes. "Will he recover?" the mother asked May. May placed her hand on the mother's shoulder. "He can recover," she said. "But it will take time and strength. He must want to be free of this poison." The young man opened his eyes. He looked at May and nodded weakly. "I do," he said. May smiled. "Then we will help you," she said. "But you must promise to help yourself too." Another lesson was about greed. The foreign merchants who sold opium cared only about their profits. They ignored the pain they caused. Thomas, the British sailor, saw this greed firsthand. He remembered the looted treasures, the destroyed cities, and the suffering of the people. When he returned to London, he spoke to his friend George. "We took too much," Thomas said. "The opium trade brought us wealth, but at what cost? We destroyed lives for money." George nodded. "It's true," he said. "But do you think the world will ever change?" Thomas looked thoughtful. "I don't know," he said, "but we must try. If we don't, the same mistakes will be made again and again." The Opium Wars also taught the importance of fairness between nations. The unequal treaties had shown what happened when one country used its power to dominate another. In Beijing, a scholar named Wang wrote about these lessons in his journal. "We must remember this time," he wrote. "We must remember the pain and the loss. But we must also remember that it is not only the weak who suffer. Greed and inequality harm all nations, even those who seem strong." He closed his journal and looked out the window at the ruins of his city. "If we forget these lessons," he said softly, "we will face the same pain again." For some, the lessons of the Opium Wars were about the need for change. Reformers and revolutionaries believed that China needed to modernize to protect itself from future threats. Zhang's son, who had joined a group of young reformers, spoke passionately at a secret meeting. "We cannot stay the same," he said. "If we do, we will remain weak. We must learn from the foreigners. We must build stronger cities, stronger schools, and stronger armies." An older man in the group nodded. "But we must also hold on to who we are," he said. "China is a land of great history and culture. Modernizing does not mean forgetting our roots." The group agreed. They dreamed of a China that was both modern and proud of its traditions. The Opium Wars left a mark on the world, not just on China. Other countries saw the dangers of inequality and the power of greed. In Japan, leaders decided to learn from China's mistakes. They began to open their country to trade, but they did so carefully. They modernized their weapons, their schools, and their government. One Japanese leader said, "We have seen what happened to China. If we do not prepare, the same will happen to us." Japan's decisions helped it grow stronger, avoiding the humiliation that China had faced. In the United States, some merchants grew rich from trade with China. But others questioned the morality of the opium trade. Samuel, the young American trader, wrote in his diary during his first trip to China. "This land is beautiful," he wrote. "Its people are kind and hard-working. Yet we bring them a poison that destroys their lives. How can this be right?" Samuel later decided to leave the opium trade and focus on selling tea and silk instead. He believed that fairness was more important than profit. For the people of China, the lessons of the Opium Wars were deeply personal. Families like Li Wei's had seen their lives destroyed by addiction and war, but they also found strength in their struggles. One evening, Li Wei's wife stood in the fields with her youngest son. The boy was planting seeds in the soil, his hands covered in dirt. "Will these plants grow strong?" the boy asked. "Yes," she said. "If you care for them, they will grow strong, just like us. We have been through hard times, but we are still here." The boy smiled. He didn't fully understand her words, but he felt their meaning. The Opium Wars taught many lessons. They showed the dangers of greed and addiction. They reminded people of the need for fairness and understanding, and they inspired future generations to dream of a better world. For the people of China, the scars of the wars remained. But those scars became reminders of what had been lost and of what could be regained. And though the journey was long, the lessons of the past guided them toward a brighter future. Chapter 12. A New Chapter for China. The Opium Wars had left China scarred. Cities were destroyed and lives were shattered. But the people did not give up. Slowly, they began to rebuild. China's story was not over. In a small village near Canton, Li Wei's grandson walked through the fields. The crops had returned. The land was green again. He carried a wooden plow, just as his grandfather once had. "Grandfather always said the land was our strength," he told his younger sister. His sister nodded. "And now it's ours to care for." The village was alive once more. Farmers planted seeds, children laughed, and the markets bustled with energy. In the cities, the changes were even greater. Shanghai, once controlled by foreign powers, was now a place of renewal. Zhang's son had taken over the family silk shop. He worked hard to rebuild their business. One evening, he spoke to his father. "Our shop is small, but it is ours," he said proudly. Zhang smiled. "We have faced hard times," he said, "but we are still here. That is what matters." The streets of Shanghai were filled with new hope. Chinese merchants opened shops next to foreign ones. Factories and schools were built. The people were determined to take back control of their city. In Beijing, scholars and reformers worked tirelessly. They knew that China needed to learn from the past. Wang, the elderly scholar, gathered his students one last time. His voice was soft but steady. The Opium Wars taught us painful lessons, he said. But they also showed us our strength. We survived. And now we must move forward. One of his students raised his hand. How can we rebuild, teacher? Wang smiled. With knowledge, he said, with unity, and with a belief in ourselves. The reforms spread across the nation. Schools taught modern subjects alongside Chinese traditions. Factories produced goods that rivaled those of other countries. Railways connected distant cities. But the people did not forget their history. The ruins of the Summer Palace remained in Beijing, a silent reminder of the wars. May, who had worked as a maid during the wars, visited the site one day. She stood among the rubble, her heart heavy. This place was once so beautiful, she said softly. A young boy nearby asked, "Will it ever be rebuilt?" May knelt beside him. "Maybe not," she said, "but its memory lives on, and that is enough to inspire us." In the countryside, Li Wei's wife became a leader in her village. She taught the young women to be strong and resourceful. One evening, as the sun set, she spoke to a group of girls. "Our land has seen war and suffering," she said. "But we are still here. You must never forget that." The girls listened closely. They knew they were part of something bigger, a new chapter for China. The world watched as China began to rise again. Other nations noticed the changes. They saw a country determined to reclaim its strength. In Japan, leaders were impressed by China's progress. "They are finding their path," one advisor said. "We must respect their journey." In the United States, traders returned to China with curiosity. They no longer saw it as a weak nation, but as a partner with potential. Even in Britain, the view of China began to shift. Thomas, the sailor who had fought in the wars, followed the news from afar. One day, he spoke to his grandson. "I once thought we had won the Opium Wars," he said. "But now I see that China is winning in the end. They are rebuilding. They are finding their strength." His grandson listened carefully. "Do you think they will ever forget the wars?" Thomas shook his head. "No," he said, "and they shouldn't. Those memories are what make them strong." The lessons of the Opium Wars became part of China's identity. The people honored their history, but they did not let it hold them back. Zhang's grandson, who had grown up hearing stories of the wars, became a teacher in Shanghai. He taught his students about China's struggles and its victories. "History is not just about the past," he told them. "It is a guide for the future. We learn from it. We grow from it." The students nodded. They felt proud to be part of China's story. In Beijing, a new generation of leaders emerged. They spoke of unity, strength, and hope. One leader, inspired by the reformers of the past, addressed a crowd in the city square. "Our ancestors faced great challenges," he said. "They suffered, but they never gave up, and because of them, we stand here today, stronger, wiser, united." The crowd cheered. The leader's words echoed through the square, filling the people with determination. The scars of the Opium Wars remained, but they no longer defined China. Li Wei's grandson stood in the fields one evening, watching the sun set over the mountains. He thought of his grandfather, who had suffered so much. "This land has seen hard times," he said to himself, "but it is still here, and so are we." His words captured the spirit of the nation, a spirit of resilience, hope, and pride. China's journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face and obstacles to overcome. But the people had learned from the past. The Opium Wars were a painful chapter, but they were also a powerful one. They reminded the people of their strength.